they're not necessarily seeking out the experts. In fact, they're probably seeking to avoid the experts. They want people's stories. They want people's personal experience. They want authenticity. And I think that's a really great opportunity.
It's really important to make sure that you're really upfront about what you, in terms of values, what you're believing in, because if they'll cut you off if not. I think it's just as hard, as easy as that, because they're like, I don't have time, there's so many people that are demanding my attention, we're in an age of overconsumption, and it's trying to cut through that noise is half the challenge.
Someone is recommending something by digitally sharing it, and actually that can be a really powerful thing for a charity. If a Gen Zer is endorsing something online and they've got 20,000 followers or whatever it is, that's such a powerful marketing tool that they've not necessarily even asked them for. Yeah. If a Gen Zer is engaged with whatever you're doing and organically shares it, that's so powerful.
Welcome to this latest episode of CommsCast with Jersey Road. My name is Liam Flint and I'm Marketing and Communications Officer at Jersey Road. We've got a really exciting topic that we're talking about today, and to discuss that with me of two special guests. So we're going to be talking about how we reach the emerging generation, and by that we mean Gen Z. So to help me do that, we have Ruth Jackson with us, who is producer for Premier Unbelievable. Ruth, good to have you with us.
Thanks very much for having me.
Pleasure. And Ruth is not used to being on this side of the camera. Normally she's the producer, so this is going to be brilliant just to watch her mannerisms and see whether she actually enjoys this. But yeah, we'll keep tabs on that, won't we, Ruth?
Feeling nervous.
Relax, it's all good. And we also have Fay Austen with us, who is a senior account executive at Jersey Road. Fay, you are our in-house Gen Zer. Welcome.
My goodness, what pressure.
Yeah, so all the wisdom is going to be coming from your end. And if we as millennials get anything wrong, we're expecting you to keep us accountable and to keep us on track.
That's
so
right.
I'm assuming you're happy with
I
that.
can definitely do that. It's good.
So guys, as we've said, we're going to be talking about this next generation, which we are classing as Gen Z. So obviously, Fay, you're the authority on that. You've already told us, I'm pretty sure it's 1997 to 2012. And where are you on that sliding scale?
I mean, controversially, I am on the lower end of the scale, so I'm 99, so just squeezing in as Gen Z. But
that's all right, you still count.
And
yeah, Ruth, you and I, we're definitely millennial proud.
I'm almost Gen X.
But we're proud to be millennials.
So proud.
We'll take it, one end and the other. That's absolutely fine. Ruth, I said we'll just explain what your role is. You're a producer with Premier. People have heard you doing the Unbelievable show. Just tell us a little bit about what that is and your work in that area.
So Premier Unbelievable is like the umbrella term for all things apologetics, which in itself is a particularly unhelpful term,
Lovely
I think,
word,
but it comes from 1 Peter 3:16, always be ready to give a reason for the hope that you have. So it's basically all of the content that is... a lot of what we do is debates, discussions, often with an atheist and a Christian around some of these big questions. But we do a whole bunch of other shows. So some of the other shows I do are the C.S. Lewis podcast, which does what it says on the tin. We talk about C.S. Lewis. And then the Unapologetic podcast, which again, I'm not sure how helpful that term is, but I just chat to psychologists, philosophers, theologians. Sometimes we shake it up a bit. I had a makeup artist last week, so that was fun. But it's normally looking at kind of apologetics and those big questions. Yeah.
And your background, quite predominantly, you've done a lot of youth work. You have a real passion for what we're calling the next generation. Why is that? Where's that passion come from?
I mean, I guess crudely speaking, they are the largest generation. They're the culture shapers. There you go. You know, what they say is sort of where everything's going. But I've been doing youth work for well over 20 years, never in a kind of paid capacity, always volunteering. So I'm sure I haven't seen a lot of the ins and outs of what my amazing colleagues have seen. But I just think young people are incredible. And particularly when it comes to apologetics, they often have the best questions, the best objections to some of this stuff. They're so passionate about so many different things. And I think it's an amazing opportunity to help shape some of their passions. And I guess on the flip side, I think what I've seen a lot with young people is tragically the rise in mental health issues, the hopelessness of that generation, and therefore helping them to realise that actually there is a hope. So I just think young people are amazing. Gen Zers are amazing. Gen Alpha, the sort of 14s and unders are also amazing. And I think they are shaping where we're going to go. So we have got to listen to them.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful context, because we're going to be discussing how charity communicators can really shape their message, their content, think about the way that we actually speak to a Gen Z, whether that's online, in person, radio, whatever it is. And I think, that's a really helpful thing to just say. there are so many good things about that generation, lots of opportunities, some other things to be mindful of. So we're going to unpack that very shortly. Fay, just for whoever's watching, listening, what are you doing at the moment in Jersey Road? What does being a senior account executive look like?
Well, I've got the pleasure to work on several different accounts with some amazing charities. And, you know, so there's teams of us, and I'm there as part of doing sort of the day-to-day outreach with the client and contacting the media. And I just get to be involved in so many different stories and amazing case studies and talk to some really fantastic people. So I feel very privileged to be part of lots of different things. And yeah, so it'll be a bit of media, talking to the media, a bit of sort of working with the client, a bit of writing, lots of different things, really. It's really great.
A very varied role.
Very varied role, and I love that, the fact that it's very varied. It's really
brilliant. And of course, in this discussion, what we're really trying to get charity communicators to think of is not to put this off and think, all right, the next generation is coming, but actually what we're doing at the moment, we're looking at millennials, or we're still looking at the over 50s, whatever that demographic looks like. So therefore, we'll give them a few years and we'll maybe come back in our messaging. At the moment, our donor base is this age, that kind of thing. But what we want to really talk about today is the fact that the next generation is here. You've already said they're large, they're important, they're a key demographic for communication and charities. So Fay, from your point of view, what would you say are some of the big characteristics of Gen Z that people should be aware of? If you were to just, in a nutshell, what are Gen Z for those who aren't really aware of this kind of audience? What would you say?
Well, I think Gen Z, you know, they grew up with access to the internet, with social media, technology. It's kind of a norm. So, you know, not to throw that term about, but they're like a digitally native generation. Yeah. I feel very like the influence of technology and the internet has been massive growing up, just for me personally. So I think there is an element of it's just an extension of their you know, everyday life now. It's not a separation between digital space, and because that's where a lot of communication happens nowadays. It's one and the same. So I think that's something that is really unique and to bear in mind when, you know, people are communicating with Gen Z, is to understand that kind of interchangeability, and it's as both are important as one another. And I also think, you know, they're very you know, they know what they want. I think I know, like, speaking from experience, I know what I want to see, I know what I want to be communicated to about. So I think they're very decisive about what they want, and I think that's really helpful, but I suppose can also be quite a challenge. But yeah, I think it's kind of what makes Gen Z a bit different, I think, as well.
Yeah, you used the word digital there, and I know, Ruth, obviously your background, you've done a lot of media outreach, you've done radio. When you're specifically working in that field, and of course we're talking about written media, we're talking about press, we're talking about radio, what do you always have in mind? How important is the use of language maybe and your messaging as someone who is trying to reach people through their headphones? What are some of the things that you're trying to catch Gen Z on and that you're thinking about?
I mean, it doesn't help that I work in apologetics, which is an incredibly confusing term, but absolutely language is so key. And so, for instance, you know, if in a kind of theological context, if you're talking, for instance, about sin or something, we're in a very post-Christian culture where they're just, which is on the one hand a really great thing, because there's no cultural baggage, as there is maybe in my generation of like the church is this and the church is that. We're sort of almost starting from scratch, which can be a really positive thing, but it means that there's no reference point for a lot of things. So if you say something like sin, the kind of connotation is perhaps lingerie or chocolate, the kind of sinful, playful, and in which case you're on a really confusing starting point when you're talking about that. So I think we've got to be really clear that our language has got to be clear, it's got to be like no jargon, and that's one of the reasons we're going to be starting a TikTok channel, which, you know, think doing apologetics in sort of 50 seconds is going to be interesting. But partly we were like, if you can't communicate something well and clearly, then you know, maybe you're not articulating it properly in the first place. I think actually if you're creating stuff that is applicable for teenagers, then it's going to be applicable for everyone. That doesn't mean you're watering down the message, but you're just trying to think, how do we do this clearly? And I think going to where people are is a really important thing. I remember when I was working at Blue Peter, we had Justin Bieber's first ever live performance on Blue Peter, and we were all, I would have been younger then, but we were like, who the heck is Justin Bieber? The YouTube was just becoming a thing. We were like, who's Justin Bieber? Anyway, we had this guy, he was pretty good, had this guy on the show, and we were like, yeah, cool, that was a fine performance. And then we had like a live web chat afterwards, and it basically broke the BBC's internet because this guy was so massive. And that was such a learning curve of like, actually, young people know where it's at. They know who this Justin Bieber guy is because he got massive through YouTube. And I think the same is true of TikTok and influencers, social media influencers and things like that. So it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, that we've got to go where these people are because they're setting the precedent, they're setting the culture. And so we can't just be sort of sat thinking, what are the things we want to talk about? What are the ways we want to communicate? It's almost letting Gen Z or Gen Alpha dictate where we go with this stuff.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think we often think as an older generation that we dictate to the next. I think there's a lot of misinformation, stereotyping of Gen Z in the language that they use. And it's quite often, even from someone in my 30s, there's so many memes and videos made of Gen Z in the language and what that will look like in different areas of life. And I think rather than seeing it as an obstacle or something that actually is a bit of a joke maybe, or something that we don't understand, it wasn't like this when we were 20 years old, there needs to be a learning of the language, doesn't there, Faye, in actually realising, okay, they are the future. So we need to, rather than alienate ourselves and stick to what we know, we need to go where they are digitally, and we need to learn to speak their language. So what does that look like, do you think? How can we better, as charity communicators, be where they are and then start to learn their language? What do you think some of the questions are, or things you'd be suggesting we do?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I think, Ruth, what you were saying about it being sort of simplified, I think that's really important. It's no secret that Gen Z technically have a shorter attention span than any other generation before them. And it sounds unfortunate and maybe a little bit negative, but I think it's just something you've got to work with. And so, going to those platforms where, TikTok, where they're majoritarily, hanging out for want of a better term, I think is probably the first step. Second is, as you said, Liam, to kind of understand some of that language. There's lots of creators, saying, this is how Gen Z refer to this language, this term, this slang is different. I think it's really great to sort of understand some of the things like that, but also I think if you try too hard to go the other way, it almost makes the gap even wider.
Stop being my mum.
I mean, a little bit of that, but I think also, Gen Z really respond to, you don't have to overthink it. I think that's really important as well. And I suppose this must be something you come across quite a lot when you're producing your podcast, like doing quite interesting, complex discussions, topics. I think just even though Gen Z might use different languages to you, they also, their media literacy is that of maybe different to other generations. They've grown up with it, and they will understand concepts even if they're not done in specific language. So basically just be really transparent and really straightforward with what you want to say. It doesn't matter if it's not the specific slang or the specific language. I think Gen Z will just resonate with your cause or your topic or your charity. So I think for charities where their messaging is going to be so strong, even if, not to overthink it with Gen Z, just really go for, if you want to reach them, just show what you stand for and they will find you. So although language is part of it and it's good to understand that, it doesn't have to be too complicated, I don't think.
And I think a massive pro on that is that they're not necessarily seeking out the experts. In fact, they're probably seeking to avoid the experts. They want people's stories. They want people's personal experience. They want authenticity. And I think that's a really great opportunity, because it means you don't necessarily have to be the best at this or the CEO of this. Like, actually, people telling their own stories and sharing their own experience can be a really powerful way of reaching Gen Z and Gen Alpha.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we're going to move on to values, because that is a central pillar of what is going to help communicators really just get in the same room as Gen Z. I think is so important. And just a final point on the language, I think what you're saying there, Faye, I think we forget that as a Gen Z and the generations below, they are hit with so many different ads or stimulations or videos, demands on their time, WhatsApp messages, Snapchat, whatever it is. And so for you to get their attention, like you said, to be simplistic and to be direct and clear when you've maybe got 2 seconds to get them, otherwise they've scrolled past you. I think, we can talk about values and we can talk about the content you use, but the language, if you don't put it in a way that they're going to understand, then you've lost them and they're gone. And I think quite often, I don't know if with your role already you've seen this, but quite a few charities, the text is just very solid. It's often quite complex. It's not really tailored for any kind of audience. It is just, this is what we are. And maybe 20 years ago, this is still what we read, and it hasn't really evolved. So I think, yeah, you're right, keeping it simple and direct, understanding where they are and the speed that they're traveling in their minds is key.
Definitely. And I think also there can be an invitation there to engage with some of that longer form content, because I think Gen Z are, hungry to understand things more, different things, but to get them in the door, using more visuals, for example. We're a visual generation, Instagram, TikTok, video and infographics, that kind of thing, breaking down complex issues, but also saying, if you want to engage with this more closely, more detailed, that longer form content, you can head to this place, really making it easy for them to find where they want to be. I think that it's not one or the other. I think it's just getting them, knowing how to get in the door, as you said, that attention spans are shorter, and so making it worth their time.
100%. Okay, so language, tick, we've covered that one. So values, Ruth, you've just brought us onto the issue of values. So I'll start with you. From your experience and the work that you've done, what would you say some of the key values that come through time after time from this generation are? What do they want to hear from you? What content do you find really resonates, or key themes that they really seem to respond to? What would those be?
I think we've touched on it, but I think the sort of storytelling element of it, there's a screenwriter called Brian Godawa, I think is how you say his name, but he talks about the fact that the Bible is 30% about 30% propositional truth and about 70% storytelling and imagination. And that's why people like C.S. Lewis is still really relevant, because a good story will still be a good story. Sure, he was a product of his time and there's stuff that we might want to reinterpret, but actually good stories will always resonate with people. And I think when we're telling people's stories, I find the content that resonates best is, yes, people are interested in interesting discussions and debates and topics, but when people are sharing their own experience of something, that is particularly resonating. And I think you can do that in shorter form. And again, as Fay says, perhaps then lead them onto something longer. So I'm always surprised that actually podcasts are a really effective way of Gen Z. In my opinion, I would have thought, it's maybe this is me being like a granny, but like, it's too long for them to engage in. But actually, from all the research that I've read, like they'll read something maybe on the news and it will say a fact, but then podcasting will like tell them more about it, and it will show different perspectives, it will show diverse voices, and particularly when it's a kind of discussion format or a debate format, it dives much further, sort of deeper into it. But I think that's got to be held in tension with people's personal stories. So the first thing I always do when I interview someone is to ask them to tell a little bit of their story, either kind of their faith journey or how they got into something, because I think that gives them a certain level of authenticity for someone to then carry on listening. But that, again, I don't know how you do that in a kind of grabby 2-second way. I think perhaps it's a visual of someone's face and things like that. But yeah, storytelling is probably one of the key things that I've been seeing from a Gen Z.
And I think we'd spoken before about the need to not just storytell, but also to use young people on the face of those stories. And again, I think historically charities maybe not brilliant at this, and that again they'll just put someone out there as the poster boy or girl of what they're doing without thinking about, okay, this person's now 63 and we're trying to reach someone else. But not just showcasing stories, but also having people in there who are that age, so they can go, oh, okay, I can see Fay is on this socials post, and therefore I now want to give, or I want to align myself with this because I see that this is actually aimed at me. Fay, how important is that in terms of transparency, authenticity, which we know, again, Gen Z massively passionate about, that you see yourselves reflected in communications, socials, advertising, whatever it is?
Yeah, I think, as you said, it's that classic thing. You always want to see yourself represented, don't you? You flock towards people that are similar to you, and for Gen Z, it'll be that element of them knowing that, oh, if this person who looks about my age, looks like they have similar experiences to me, they're affiliated with this, or they're talking about this topic, then this is obviously something that's probably relevant to me just by, process of elimination. We've got shared experiences. They'll have grown up in the same area. They'll be communicating in specific ways. It's that whole language again. So I think that's really helpful also, just to show that, charities are really appreciating different generations. Because I know, for example, Gen Z don't necessarily aren't statistically have the most spending power, for example, in terms of, if charities are looking for, support, but what they can do is give their time. And I think Gen Zs are doers, and that's why, for example, they want to follow things. That's why they want to engage with podcasts, because they want to consume stuff and give time over, for example. So I think, and with storytelling, if they can show there's more to tell a story about people doing things than just giving some money, even though that's very important as well. So I think if Gen Zs can see that happening and see those people doing that, they'll resonate, and it's just they'll click on it, won't they? And read it.
And I think particularly if it comes from a friend, gone are the days when you'll read something because something in the press tells you to read it, or whatever. You'll read something or buy something because a friend has recommended it. And obviously, well, I'm speaking for both of us here, but in my that would be someone telling me face to face. But for Gen Z, that is synonymous with a digital share,
100%.
isn't it? It's someone is recommending something by digitally sharing it, and actually that can be a really powerful thing for a charity. If a Gen Zer is endorsing something online and they've got 20,000 followers or whatever it is, that's such a powerful marketing tool that they've not necessarily even asked them for. If a Gen Zer is engaged with whatever you're doing and organically shares it, that's so powerful.
I think Gen Z also, just from experience, I think we consume communications a little bit more one-to-one. It's a bit more like an individual. It's a bit like an influencers, for example. They'll say, "Hey guys, I'm talking to one individual," and that kind of person-to-person kind of consumption and communication, I think they respond much more to than a sort of like a broadcast something like a newsletter. Although they, again, they're very beneficial in their own right. But so I think if they have someone, another Gen Z person, having that one-to-one, even though obviously it might be to several thousand people, I think it just lands a bit better. I don't know for what reason, but speaking from experience, I think it just has a different impact.
I mean, that's just really helpful. That's why, Faye, having your insight is so good, because we may not be able to explain everything and why these things happen, but sometimes they just land, sometimes they resonate, and it's not necessarily a tactical thing. But I think these values we're talking about, charities can proactively align themselves with these and kind of hit these buttons, and I think they'll get such success. I think about social justice, social action. For me, I think, charities, you're doing so much good. You are always cause driven. You're helping this person. You're raising money for this. You are fighting climate change. It feels like charities are ready made to lock in with the next generation, for them to be advocates, for them to be influencers, for them to be donors. But it feels like it's not happening. But in my mind, people who are 18, 19, 20 right now, they live for that stuff, and they would love to see a brand that is positioning themselves with, we want to eradicate poverty around the world, or we want to talk about face stories. So it feels like there's a real synergy there, but I don't know if it's just the communication is not quite there. But if charities could learn to really hone in on that storytelling, to me it's a match made in heaven, isn't it? In that that's exactly what people want to give to their time, resource, money, is to something that's going to make a difference. And to me it feels like it ticks those boxes. Do you agree?
I would say so. I think there's a lot. I think what is really important to remember is that there is so much, we talked about sort of the attention economy, right? Attention is the biggest commodity that can possibly be given. And I think Gen Z, in a way, have quite a self-awareness about, the fact that, how much agency they have and how much they don't. They can choose to consume something, or, they'll choose not to consume something. So I think it's really important to make sure that you're really upfront about what in terms of values, what you're believing in, because if they'll cut you off, if not, I think it's just as hard, as easy as that, because they're like, I don't have time. There's so many people that are demanding my attention. We're in an age of overconsumption, and it's trying to cut through that noise is half the challenge. So I think if you in terms of values, be really clear about what you stand for, make it worth their time, I think, as well. And if charities can marry that and the storytelling element as well, I'm sure Gen Zs are going to be flocking over.
And I think a big thing as well, again, I think we've touched on this, but that sort of authenticity piece of stuff. I think some of the people that you see resonating best on TikTok and Instagram Reels and things like that is people who are really honest. I get so fed up, particularly in a church context. We often have people who have come through a victory and they're talking about their struggles in the past. This is my victory story. This is where I was. This is how I've overcome. Whereas what I think Gen Z are amazing at doing is saying, I am in the midst of my struggles and this is how I'm coping in the middle of this, particularly when it comes to mental health and all sorts of things. And I think actually that's what resonates. And I think charities charities could be doing a really good job of that. There's a balance, isn't there? We don't want to be airing our dirty laundry all the time, but here are some of the things we're struggling with. Here's how you could help us with this. Or are these your struggles? These are our struggles. This is how we're all struggling. I think when I interviewed this makeup artist last week, she talked about the fact that our generation will go to her and say, oh, this is what I want to look like. And they'll show her a picture and it's like a Photoshop photo that's totally poreless. And she'll say, well, I can't do that because that's Photoshop. That's not actually how people look. Whereas the younger generation that comes out, they recognise what filters are. And she was saying that I actually don't think filters are going to last, because I think Gen Z have got wise to this, Gen Alpha have got wise to this, and they know that filters are not real. And so I think, and I don't know how this works itself out in a charity context, but in a way, trying to be filterless, trying to be real with Gen Z and say, this is who we are, this is some of the depths of poverty that we're in, and just being real about the struggles and real about where there are ways that they could help could actually speak really powerfully to Gen Z and Gen Alpha, I think, potentially.
Yeah, they just want transparency and just, for it to be presented as it is. And I think, Ruth, we've spoken before about almost not having overly polished media. Again, they want to see a bit more just off the cuff, amateurish, doesn't have to be perfect. They just want things to be presented how you actually intend it. And I think the same goes for brands and charities. And if you say you're going to do something and it's your value, it needs to match up. It needs to align for then the young generation to actually buy into what you're doing. Whereas I think maybe the older generation probably wouldn't say, where's my money actually going? What percentage is going here? This photo again looks photoshopped, or it's not quite authentic, and that will be enough for them. And Fay, I know you've said to me before, I think you said Gen Z want to consume media on their terms. You were quite strong on that. So I just wanted to ask you to unpack that a little bit. What does that look like for someone trying to communicate with them?
Yeah, I think it boils down to that transparency, that kind of, they're not negating their sort of experience or what they're going to bring to it. For every climate activist, there's climate anxiety, and for every, housing crisis, there's people that are struggling to get on the housing ladder. So I think it's really, keeping that in mind, but consuming media on their terms. I think I just kind of meant we don't really like to be told what to consume, like, as I said before, there are so many people trying to sell us stuff, and that's not exclusive to Gen Z. That's for every person who is, interacting with digital media or anything nowadays. But there is so much going on trying to sell us stuff and get our attention, that kind of thing. We want to kind of be able to find what's important to us and then go and find it, like make sure, for example, just to use Instagram as an example, if you're a charity, put all of your information, all of your values on your Instagram page. Make it really easy for people to know who you are. If people are interested, they'll come find you. The algorithm will feed through to them. That's the thing. Also optimizing your content for algorithms, obviously, but that's a whole different story. A whole different thing.
There's layers to this.
There's layers and layers. But whereas trying to sell them things and trying to ask without, ask for things without the context, without, engaging them and building them and sustaining them as an audience, really get them on side, because, if their time and attention is worth a lot, and Gen Z are really aware of how much, as I said, how much their time is worth, how much their attention is worth, then they're going to come to you. Don't try too hard to get them on side, because you'll just put them off. Yeah. I think I know it sounds quite black and white, but I think that is just how it is.
Well, you guys sound quite difficult from over
there. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Want it just how you want it, when you want it.
I know.
I feel like we're much more laid back, Ruth. We just,
We've got it all sorted.
But, I feel like we're going to make some change. So.
But this is exactly what I mean. Without being patronising, I think Gen Z are flipping awesome because they do know what they want. And actually, if they grab a hold of something, that's it. There's no going back. They're like running at it with all guns blazing.
So
and they really are world changing. You look at Greta Thunberg and people like that. They are changing the world. Whether you like them or not, they're changing the world because they believe that they can. And you're probably too young for this, but I grew up with I'm going to be a history maker in this land. That Delirious song. And we were like, we're going to be history makers. None of us ever were, but your generation really are history makers. And it's like flattening that curve. It's not the experts, it's the young people saying, we don't necessarily need adults. We can do this. We can be change makers. You see incredible examples of Gen Z see, getting on with stuff on Instagram and social media and really making a change, lobbying government, things like that. So I think, we've got to get them on side, but we've got to do it in a way that works for them, that's not manipulating them in any way, which I think that is really tricky, trying to work out the mechanics of all of that. And I do think as well, it comes back to the kind of storytelling and the being what you can see online. So, you could share a statistic with someone about people in poverty, or you could just tell someone's story, a really powerful story of someone who's been helped by a charity or moved in a particular way or been part of a community engagement project or whatever. And I think that will speak so much more powerfully in a much more natural, engaging way than feeling like they've been manipulated into giving money or time or resources, whatever it is.
And those stories work so well because I think Gen Z also want real life. We're not we are chronically online, for better or for worse, but I think also they want real life stories, and those storytelling shows this messaging is online and that's how we found it, but actually this is how we're engaging in real life. And so if charities can find that balance, don't just focus on your social media presence, but also show how what is on your social media is happening in real life, and then also make sure what's happening in real life is on your social media. So when people come and find you, then it's all it's a synergy there.
You're bridging really nicely into just the opportunities, which is where I wanted to finish really. And that I hear what you're saying, that if we can engage Gen Z, they are loyal, they are passionate, they are activists, they'll actually get up and do something. They won't just sit there behind the keyboard. I think they're the generation who will actually go and take things further. And I think for charities, that's vital. You think about the future. You want people who are going to actually pioneer what you're doing. Gen Z will digitally share, as you've said. It'll be the same as a physical share for the older generation, and things can spread. So if it's brand awareness, if it's, hey, this campaign, you need to give money towards it. I feel like Gen Z are positioned so well to maximise that. Social causes will explode, GoFundMe accounts will explode, influencers will help with that as well. And this might not sound like an opportunity, but it's been well documented that Gen Z are the loneliest generation, in that, as you've said, Gen Z, chronically online, their world is very digital, and that can lead to loneliness. We've seen that in the stats. And Ruth, especially in what you're doing, where you're passionate about giving people hope, and that is in terms of faith and providing content that's going to actually enrich their souls. How important is that to offer community to a generation that we know they're online, but they are actually physically quite lonely a lot of the time? So what would you say in terms of the importance of offering them community and hope and a message?
I think it's paramount. I mean, I don't think it's again, the research backs this up, but I don't think it's any surprise that 2012 was the rise of the smartphone, and 2012 was when we really began to see a pandemic almost of depression and loneliness and isolation. So I think we do need to engage digitally. Of course we do, because that's where young people are. We need to be creating communities, whatever that looks like. And I don't think Gen Z and Gen Alpha differentiate between their online friends and their in real life friends. They are real life friends. It's not online and offline. They're just friends. So I think it's really important that we do that online. But I do also think we need to be reaching out in an analog world. I interviewed a guy recently who talks, he works in Silicon Valley. He's a pastor in Silicon Valley, but he talks about the necessity of analog in the middle of this digital age. And I do think it's important that we do that as well. And I think that's much harder, because that involves sort of trying to figure out where young people are, not just in the digital spaces and in the physicality. But I do think that's really important as well, getting alongside them, getting alongside those who are raising up the next generation as well. And I think, one of the things I used to do when I was editing YCW magazine was trying to help those who were engaging the next generation, be that parents, youth workers, children's workers, and that's a really important thing as well. But I think it is paramount in knowing that they're not alone. I think so much of this isn't just a Gen Z thing by any but whenever you're going through something, just to have someone be like, yeah, I get it. Yeah. That's my experience too. I'm like a fairly young mum. I've got a toddler who's wonderful, but absolutely feral. And when I meet other mums who are like, oh yeah, no, my kid does that. She whacks people. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. It's not just me. There is like a real resonance when someone says, I've been there, I experienced that. And I think for all generations, but particularly for Gen Z and Gen Alpha, to say, I see you, I see your pain. I might not be able to do anything about it, but you are seen, you are known, you are heard. And then from a kind of faith perspective, to say, it's not just us that sees us, but God also sees you, and he sees your pain, and he resonates with that, and you're not alone in that. I think that's a really powerful thing.
That's brilliant. Anything to add to all that, Faye?
No, I think it's 100% true. we've talked a lot about digital spaces and all that kind of thing. And I was going to say there's loads of digital equivalence communities, like Substack and Discord and places where you are free from algorithm and you go to engage with communities and the topics that you really like. But replicating those in physical spaces is so important. And I'm a real people person. You can't replicate the kind of connection you have with people having a chat. You can't really do that online, sending messages to one another. And so building those spaces, whatever challenge it might be in the real world, is really important. And I think Gen Z are going to crave that as well. As much as they love digital spaces, they're aware of what what's not good for them. I know that my phone isn't great. I know when I need to turn it off. And I think so there's an element of both things, digital space, but also they'll understand the importance of it. So hopefully it won't be too much of an uphill battle to create those things.
Yeah. And just to finish, Faye, from your perspective, just getting in again into your very specific mindset as our Gen Z in-house, give us just one thing to end that you think charities are doing really well at the moment, that maybe reach someone like yourself. What are you seeing that actually you yourself are attracted to or think that's excellent? And maybe one encouragement or challenge that you would say, yeah, this is not working for me, or I'd love to see charities do this better. What would that give us? A bit of encouragement and a challenge to finish.
Okay, yeah, well, I think there are lots of charities that engage with young people really well. I think those that can balance the whole storytelling and also being really informative. I think Gen Z want to learn. We want to know facts. We want our horizons to be expanded, and we also want to know that things come from trustworthy sources. So if you're really making sure there's a sort of not necessarily educational resources, because that sounds like you're at school, but making sure that a charity is open and that they're providing information, and that information is not you can't dispute the fact that it's credible and that kind of thing. Also sharing stories, but also I think where possible there needs to be an element of recognizing the fact that their messaging is going to meet a Gen Z in the middle of their world. So not necessarily humor, because that's not always appropriate, but making sure that there's an element of, understanding that kind of discourse. And so, if you need to use a meme, use a meme. If you need to engage with a cultural trend, engage with a cultural trend. And some charities are doing great with that. So I think, lots of charities do it really well for lots of different reasons. And I think, Gen Z are growing, we're growing up, and they'll be the future. So it's going well for many reasons. And then in terms of what they can do better, I think, as we said, building those spaces for community, I think, part of what Gen Z are great at are being instigators. And you see it around things like fandom, for, Taylor Swift. I'm going to bring her up because I have to. Yeah. But for example, half of it is fandom for her music. And then also the other half is people centering on a community around a thing that they really really love and think is, really important in their lives, for better or for worse. But so I think charities can really centre on that. If they can create spaces for Gen Z to engage with things on their own, they'll be able to, equip and use that kind of force that comes with Gen Z, to their advantage. So lots of different ways.
Just on that, I think it does my head in when people are like, oh, what are young people interested in? And they come up with all these things. I'm like, have you actually spoken to a young person?
Yes,
stop talking about them and talk to them. Like I was asked to speak about young people at a panel, and I was like, I could, from all the, but I don't want to. So what I actually did was got a panel of young people, and I chaired the panel, and it was by far the best thing in the conference because we were actually hearing from young people themselves. What are your challenges? What are you scared of? What are you passionate about? What do you want to see changed? And I think let's stop talking. If there will be charities that don't know how to engage with young people, of course there will, because it's chaired by people like us that are old and don't know about young people. But go and ask young people what do you want to hear about? What are you passionate about? And I think that's really important. Let's stop talking about young people and actually talk to them.
Yeah, that's really important. And it feels so obvious, but genuinely we don't. Yeah. We just talk about Gen Z, or we talk about an audience we'd like to reach, and we forget to actually invite them into the conversation. So that's hugely helpful. Yeah, thank you to you both for your insights. Really appreciate it. Hope it's been enjoyable, and we could talk for days, but we need to stop. So thank you both.
Cheers.
And thank you for watching or listening. If you have enjoyed this, please do head over to our website to find out more about us. Just go to jerseyroadpr.com, and you can also go and check us out on social media.